All right, we are live here with Travis Talks. Um, do you want to just sort of jump into this disagreement with my insect hypothetical?
Yeah, I'm not really sure if it's a hypothetical, but it's more like an analogy.
Yeah, true.
Um, well, why don't we start off? You can for people who haven't seen the video, you can explain what your basic point about it is, then I can respond.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So as a utilitarian, typically you hear a lot of reductios that tend to stem from this idea that as long as utility is maximized, or as long as well-being is maximized, then you can really do anything to anybody. So that would include torturing a baby to fuel like a happy world, or some of the more interesting examples is like two people um es- two people essaying somebody, and the two people get more pleasure than the person that they assaulted. um and it seems kind of icky to a lot of us, at least intuitively, but I think that we actually do something very similar in our day-to-day lives with insects, where the pleasure of having like a stable job, or like taking your kids to school on time, or and all these things kind of justifies us like massacring them with our cars, or like not like paying attention as we walk to work. And there's this sort of idea that perhaps that doesn't actually increase or decrease utility, like maybe wild suffering is worse. But even if we just grant that it does decrease utility, I think we would still call it justified, for the reason that it gives us pleasure, or
Yeah,
increases pleasure. Yeah.
so your basic point your basic point is like people will object to utilitarian reasoning, but those same people, we already use utilitarian reasoning when it comes to insects.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, so I'm not convinced that we actually do use utilitarian reasoning when it comes to insects. Um, when most people are okay with um, walking outside or driving their car, even though it comes with the risk, or I mean, even though insects are going to be killed by that. I don't think most people who think that's okay, I don't think they're actually running some cost benefit analysis. I don't think they're actually doing some utilitarian calculus that, okay, yes, it causes more suffering. I mean, yes, it causes some amount of suffering to insects, but the pleasure that is generated from this activity outweighs the suffering. I don't really think that's what's going on through people's minds. I feel like people just don't really think much about the effect those activities have on insects at all.
Yeah, I think I would agree, like people aren't like, even utilitarians aren't doing that for the most part. Like I mean, they are probably more so than your average Joe, but we're not like calculating every single decision we make. um Getting into this like utilitarian slavery where you're just, yeah. But I do think what makes it, like, upon reflection, like I do think like what makes it good is that it brings the pleasure, and I think most people would agree with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think there are a few disanalogies. I've seen this point from other utilitarians a few times before. Like, some utilitarians will say that humans are already utility monsters when it comes to insects. Like, humans are the utility monsters to insects. Um, and I don't really think the analogy works because I think there are several disanalogies between humans and insects. Um, when you take about the utility monster case and the case of how humans treat insects. So for one thing, this entire analogy is it rests upon several assumptions, controversial assumptions about insect sentience and suffering. Like, it's not even clear that insects have a subjective experience at all. That's something, as I understand it, that's kind of a controversial topic, or like it's a contentious like issue. There's not like really a consensus that um, insects are sentient in the same way there is one with like other animals such as mammals, or even like chickens or other birds, or even like something like fish. Like whether insects feel or perceive anything, that's a much more like debated topic among scientists, as I understand it. So that's one thing. There's also that even if insects are sentient, it might be the case that they don't experience pain at all. Like it might be that they have some sort of subjective experience, but they're not actually experiencing pain. I think there is some research that indicates that like insects they don't exhibit the same responses to like damage stimuli that other animals do. So that's one thing. And then even if they do feel pain, it might be that they don't experience extreme suffering. Like it might be that even if insects are sentient and they do feel pain, when they're like stepped on or like run over, like this is like a very mild form of pain. It might not be anything like too like super unpleasant. So I feel like that kind of though there are those like disanalogies with the case, like because like if you're a utilitarian, you have to sign off on um, like the most extreme forms of suffering imaginable, like brutal like torture to a human, and I'm not really convinced that an insect that there's any analogous feeling that an insect experiences that's like analogous to a human being tortured or something like that.
Yes, but I think you could make some sort of a another sort of analogy where you just like so in the same realm where we have like insects who may or may not be able to suffer. I think they probably can to some degree. Versus like the humans that can suffer to a larger degree. You just take like a mega like alien human who like can suffer to a higher degree than humans can, um, and then just imagine that like that planet's uh, fueled by the energy of like torturing um, humans on Earth to increase total well-being. And
Um,
I think I don't see yeah.
well, the thing about that is, it seems like you're kind of assuming what matters is like the ratio. Um, like if an insect suffers like X amount of units of suffering from like activities like driving cars or like walking outside, and like humans receive X amount times like as much pleasure from that. Like we can think of a human, or like we can think of like an alien species where like the ratio is similar. Like humans get X amount of suffering from this, but the aliens get like whatever amount more pleasure. Like I don't really think it's the ratio that matters so much. I'm more concerned, I think, with like the like intensity of the experience being of the like intensity of the suffering.
Gotcha. Like there's some sort of like 10 points of suffering is bad in all like in kind of all cases, and insects only reach like 3 point suffering.
Yeah,
Um,
like for example, like let's say you can give like a paper cut. Um, you can like give someone a paper cut, and like however
yeah,
many like units of suffering that is, like by giving someone that paper cut, that'll generate 10 more units of pleasure than like suffering. Um, like whatever amount of suffering it's caused, times that by 10, and that's the amount of pleasure that it generates. Now, if you did that with the case of like torture, like torturing a human being, like whatever amount of suffering, whatever amount of units of suffering that causes, then you times that by 10. Um, I'm not, and it causes that much pleasure. I wouldn't sign off on that. So it's not really just about like the ratio, but just because it's the same suffering to like pleasure ratio that I'm going to be okay with it. Um, like I would care about like the intensity of the experience.
Yeah, I think we talked about this on the drunk stream, if I remember correctly. But there was this like aspect of like what is pleasure. So it's like you could have a world, like imagine torturing somebody brought a world of just maximized pleasure, but within that world of maximized pleasure is also like less suffering. Um, would you sign off on that?
Yeah, like if it causes less suffering, or I should say like less intense, like less extreme suffering, then yes. Um, you know, another issue I have with the insect analogy though is that I'm not even sure. Like, I wouldn't even grant the premise that we already do like treat insects in a utilitarian way. Now, I don't have like data on this, so it's kind of an open-ended empirical question. But I would suspect that at least for many people, like they would not be okay with like just doing a simple like utilitarian calculus on insects. Like, say you have someone who they just collect insects, random insects off the street, and their hobby is that they collect all these insects and they bring them to their room in their house, and like their hobby is just like trying to cause pain to the insects. Like they just like rip off the insects' legs and like wings. Like they take like lighters and just light the insects on fire, like all just for fun. And that's their hobby. Like even if that were to result in like a net increase in utility, I'm not sure that like most people would actually be okay with that. I feel like at least a substantial amount of people would find that to be wrong.
Yeah, something funny is that I was actually that kid. Me and my brothers used to go outside and just torture ants for fun with my magnifying glasses, and watch them, try and get them in fights and things. Um, yeah, so I guess I was that kid growing up, but I think you're probably largely right that people don't want people wouldn't think it's a good thing that uh, people are like torturing insects.
Yeah, and so if I'm correct about that, then like the entire analogy breaks down. Like if people would oppose, like if they would still find it wrong to treat insects like that, even if it did result, even if you got more pleasure out of it than the insects received suffering, if people had that like negative attitude towards it still, like the entire like analogy then would break down
Well,
because
yeah.
we don't even accept that reasoning in the case of insects then.
Well, the thing is, I mean, I think people would have an issue like sort of initially intuitively, which is kind of what I brought up in my original sort of analogy, that like people initially feel um, icky about these sort of like torturing a child, reductios and things. But I think upon reflection that people actually would say that receiving the pleasure from it is that would actually be a good thing. Um, it's just one of those things where it's like your initial intuition just seems wrong after reflection. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that I don't have that intuition. I don't think most people would have that intuition even upon reflection. Like I think even after they thought about it for a while, I think most people would still have anti-utilitarian intuitions. Like I would suspect that the amount of people who have like utilitarian like intuitions truly, I would think that's a very small fraction of the population.
I mean, it could be. I mean, we're talking about like when Lance Independent came on, we were talking about like the statistics where it's like if it's like 30% of philosophers are utilitarians, and that's if you're being generous. Um, so I could see that.
Well, yeah,
It's,
the statistic, and one of the things Lance actually pointed out was that 30% of those they didn't really even endorse utilitarianism. They endorsed consequentialism, um, which are not the same thing. You know, utilitarianism
yeah,
is just a subset of consequentialism. Like if you're a consequentialist, you can value, like there might be multiple things that you value as a consequentialist. Like you could value like freedom intrinsically. You could value like rights intrinsically. You could value the environment intrinsically. Like all those things are compatible with consequentialism, but not the sort of classical hedonic utilitarianism that you would endorse.
yeah. I'm thinking of like sort of even broadening out the insect analogy. I it seems like a lot of people think that humans are like one of the biggest harms to the environment. Like humans are a net negative to the world, um, but then they, we continue to breed humans into existence, and they continue to want to live. And I think that's another sort of sign of sort of utilitarian values, valuing our own lives, the pleasure of our lives, over like the harm of the environment and the
Um,
animals inside of it. Yeah,
yeah, I just don't think that people are like really have this kind of sense of utility. I don't think they do utilitarian calculations. I think that most people, like most people who support continuing the human species, which of course is going to be virtually all humans, except for a small handful of antinatalists. Most of those people, I would think, are not doing it because, or don't have that view because they think that that's what's going to be most conducive to maximizing pleasure in the world. I think they just do it because, I don't know, if some kind of speciesist reason, or like just some kind of view that like, oh, like I like hold some sort of obligation towards my species, or like I would like to see my species continue, or something like that.
yeah. I think that phrase I would like is kind of I'm sort of thinking about where. It seems I originally heard this sort of idea from Alex O'Connor, and I actually agree with it, where it's like we will always do what we think will bring us the most pleasure, and like we're often wrong about that, but um, it's kind of like uh, one of the main reasons I don't think we have free will. It's like we will kind of always do what we want, um, and then what you want is really just sort of like a mind state. Um, yeah, so it's like each decision seems to be like, oh, this is what's going to make me the most happy, or yeah. So that seems like a utilitarian sort of, like, even if you're not calculating it, it's just kind of what naturally happens in your mind. It's like, you as you're trying to like choose like what, if you want Indian food or Taco Bell, it's like you kind of pick the decision that you sort of want the most, yeah, or think you want the most, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're talking about some sort of psychological hedonism. Um, like we just
Yeah,
do, like when we perform actions, it's because we think those actions are going to be like result in the most like pleasure for us. I am not convinced by that. Like I don't like, oh, the problem with a lot of this stuff is that it's just speculation. Like we can have like intuitions on maybe like we can have intuitions. Oh, I think most people think this way, and I think most people, or like I think most people would think this other way. But this is kind of all like everything we've been talking about so far is like an empirical question. Like I think you'd have to actually conduct research to know. Like even what I said earlier about like the person like harming insects for fun, or like I can have that intuition. But you know, we don't. I could easily be wrong about that. It might be that most people actually don't think that way. So it's kind. I don't know. It's kind of hard when we say like, oh, like most people would think this way, but like we don't really have any empirical evidence to substantiate any of that. We're just kind of going off our intuitions on what most people would think.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, so for me, it's really hard to even think of any other scenario. Um, Even like saying that, like, oh, if we just do what will make us survive. Um, or it's like it seems like we're doing what will make us survive because we want to survive. Like it seems like it does sort of tend to just bottom out in these preferences. Um, and yeah, what is a preference? A preference is just kind of what you know ultimately desire. Yeah. Well, I don't know if that's the
Uh,
right way to phrase it. But yeah, ultimate a preference is essentially the uh what's the word I'm looking for? Because I don't want to say you desire, right? Um, but uh, I guess getting what you desire, yeah, which would be like the hedonistic sort of like happiness or pleasure, yeah.
well, I mean, the thing I don't know if like the only thing people like desire though is happiness or pleasure, because like that would like according to that, like it would be that like all of our other desires bottom out um, at pleasure, and I'm just not sure if that's the case.
Can you give like an example? Because I think that is the case.
Um, what seems like at least some people seem to have desires that don't appear to bottom out in pleasure. Like I was talking to Fish once, and um, he told me that he would desire to, he would like prefer to like know information about some horrible thing that's happening in the world, even if that decreased his happiness, even if like finding out about it made him less happy. He
Mm,
told me he'd prefer to know about that information anyway, even if it overall decreased his happiness. So that's one example where at least it doesn't seem on the surface that the desire is motivated purely by pleasure.
yeah, it's the whole like taking the red pill in the Matrix. You get the
Yeah.
knowledge, but the real world is worse than the sort of Matrix world. Um, well, yeah, the whole like he would prefer is kind of what kind of giving me a hiccup where it's like, what does that mean? He would prefer to have knowledge. I'm trying to find the difference between prefer and um like the difference between want and pleasure is a little bit blurry for me. It's like maybe it may bring about some more pain, right? Like getting more information, but the fact that he prefers it may be more actually more pleasurable to him.
Yeah, I don't know. I just view this all as like an empirical matter, really. I don't really take, I guess, a strong view. I'm kind of skeptical of the premise, but I think ultimately this is something that would have to be solved through empirical means. I don't think it's something that can be solved just the intuitions. Is I don't really have much more to say about the whole like utilitarianism insects thing. Is there something like some other topic you'd like to move on to, or?
Sure. I mean, yeah, we kind of already started talking about it, but I always thought antinatalism. I always thought our talks with that was really interesting. So yeah, I mean, antinatalism. So I'm trying to remember like what we talked about in sort of the drunk stream. So it sounds like you're sort of like um you're not entirely an antinatalist in like the like you can think of scenarios where we ought to bring you know uh kids or life into the world, but you may be like sort of like pragmatically one. Is that correct?
Yeah, so what I said is that I don't necessarily have a problem with I don't share Benatar's view, which is that it's always wrong to bring a being into existence if that being is going to experience suffering. I think that sometimes it can be a good thing to bring beings into existence, even if they will suffer. Um, that's just going to depend on the type of suffering. Like if we're talking about the principled view, um, certain forms of suffering I think are fine. It's fine to bring a being into existence, even if they'll experience more like minimal or mild forms of suffering.
Yeah, I agree. There's something about like Benatar where he says this thing where it's like you take a planet that has all this like life or not life like I don't roller coasters or whatever like all these things that could like bring about pleasure, but there's nobody that lives on there. Like we don't see that as a bad thing, and I would just say that I do see that as a bad thing. Like it seems bad that there's people not there experiencing all the pleasure that can be experienced.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I'm inclined to agree with you there. I think that if we had a button, um, like let's just say we had a red button and you could press it, and by pressing the button, you would just like magically create a utopia on Mars. Um, and like this would be like a society with we'd be talking about tons of beings that experience like nothing but pleasure, like just extremely happy lives. um there's no like torture or rape or any sort of significant suffering on this planet. You're just basically creating a utopia. Yeah, like that situation, I do think it would be wrong to not press the button.
yeah, and this is sort of actually one of my biggest like I'm like I'm a pretty strong vegan. Like I've never like had a cheat day or whatever. Like I've never abandoned my like ethical veganism. Um, but this sort of topic is what is probably the biggest for me, the biggest argument against veganism, where it's like um, it's kind of why I'm pro pet ownership, where it's like you're sort of in the same way that you may cause some exploitation of like bringing someone into existence where they can now experience paper cuts. You may like have some exploitation by like forcing or like encouraging like your dog to breed with another dog or something and then bringing them into existence. But it seems that like dogs and humans um, tend to get along really well, and it tends to like the relationship tends to be pretty net positive. So I do see it sort of an analogous as to like roller coasters and um, so that's sort of one thing that a lot of vegans may like disagree with is like being a pro pet ownership. I also see it as sort of an argument for a certain type of zoos, um, as well as perhaps an argument for certain types of like these like Elwood dog meat happy farms. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah, maybe that's something we could talk about because you're pro zoo,
yeah,
right? Yeah. So my concern with zoos is that I mean, first of all, I'm skeptical of just the premise that that the animals in zoos live lives that contain mostly happiness. Um, like I'm skeptical of that. I think it might be the case that they experience lives um, consisting mostly of suffering. Um, though I wouldn't say that I wouldn't necessarily I'm not going to affirm that. I'm not going to say confidently, yes, like zoo animals have lives consisting mostly of suffering, because zoos actually isn't something that I've looked into a whole bunch, like the conditions that zoo animals live in. Um,
Yeah.
I think there is like concerns from what I have, the little that I have seen, there is concerns about like the fact that they're like kept in captivity, like the enclosed spaces that they're in. Like I've heard that like sometimes they can get kind of bored or like depressed, living in these sorts of like small spaces that they're in at zoos. Like they don't have as much room to roam around in as they would in the wild.
Yeah, that's certainly the case, at least for certain types of animals, like cheetahs, for example, right? Like cheetahs need a lot of room to run around, and but you can't really get that in a zoo. Um, and we kind of have this fetish with like keeping animals alive, where it's like it may be the case that cheetahs just simply shouldn't exist because in the wild they have pretty net negative lives, and in a zoo they'd probably have pretty net negative lives as well. So um, my pro zoo position is really just for animals that it seems likely that they would be happy. Um,
By
and
the way, for the person in the chat asking for my link, um, I assume you're talking about my YouTube channel. I don't have right now. I don't have any videos. Like I don't have a YouTube channel with any videos on it. But I might at some point in the future start making videos. I was talking with Jerome about that the other day, actually.
yeah, you should. I mean, all it takes is just turning on a camera and talking. So
Yeah, there. I might make if I do make one. I might make some like reaction videos too. There's this certain there's this pro-life channel on YouTube called Equal Rights Institute, um, and they have a video on their channel that's I think it's called like When They Bite the Bullet, and it's basically talking about like when they're interacting with if you're a pro-lifer and you're interacting with like pro-choice people, and like the pro-choice person that they're talking to bites the bullet on something, on some reductio, like how should you proceed with the conversation at that point. um, and so they talk about like utilitarians who bite the bullet. They talk about people who bite the bullet on like infanticide, people who will like say, oh yeah, actually fine to it's fine to kill even like newborn babies. That is a view that some like pro-choice people hold,
yeah,
especially like some pro-choice philosophers. I don't know if you've ever read the paper. I think it was called something like post-birth abortion. Um, there was like a paper
yeah,
a while ago called post-birth abortion, basically arguing that like newborns have a similar moral status as fetuses, um, and that abortion is permissible, and but that infanticide is also permissible. And one thing that's important to note about this paper, it wasn't like the sort of like some people will say, oh, you should be able to like kill an infant. You should be able to like euthanize them basically if they have some sort of painful disease or like
yeah.
some kind of illness that's going to be very painful and they're just going to die in like maybe 2 weeks, or like they're going to die and they're just going to live a painful life. Some people argue parents should have the right to euthanize them to alleviate them of their suffering.
Hmm.
This paper was not arguing for that. This paper was arguing that infants in general, doesn't matter, like even if it's a perfectly healthy infant, you should still be able to kill them. Like if a
Oh.
parent decides like, yeah, I don't want this baby, like they should just be able to kill like a 2-week-old like newborn. I don't remember what their cutoff was, like when they say it's wrong, to what age they say it's wrong to kill them. I think they said like after it develops self-awareness, but I don't remember like when the authors thought that self-awareness begins. So they talked about, that's one thing they talked about in the video. And then the section that I'm most interested in was they talked about people who they had a section when they talked about animal ethics. And so they talked about people who bite the bullet on animals being people, right? Because they have this argument that they call the equal rights argument. And basically the argument is that like the criteria that certain pro-choicers will like list as what's necessary for personhood, which varies. Like it'll be like sentience or like birth or self-awareness or like something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the basic argument is that all the criteria that pro-choicers will use, they basically end up casting either too wide a net or too narrow a net when it comes to the beings that are considered people. So like if you're someone that uses like self-awareness as that's what makes someone a person, then you're going to end up that's going to end up entailing that newborn infants aren't people. And if you are someone that says that sentience or consciousness is what determines personhood, then you're going to have to bite the bullet on animals being people. And so they had a section on like people who say that, and that was specifically the section that I wanted to respond to, because they said like, oh, if you think animals are people, like, do you think all this other stuff too? And I wanted to respond specifically to that portion of the video.
Yeah, I think that would be a good I think you'd have a good response to that. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, if you the whole like share that paper with Destiny.
Yeah, it's a weird paper. Yeah, I actually have talked to one of the people, that Equal Rights Institute. They've actually blown up pretty big on TikTok. Like I know they have a TikTok page. Their like TikTok responses have actually gotten pretty big on that platform. About a year ago, I actually had a conversation with someone from, I had two video calls, actually 2 Zoom calls with someone from that group, that Equal Rights Institute group, and we talked about like their views on personhood and like if sentience was like what's the proper criteria for personhood. Unfortunately it's not recorded, so
Oh shoot. Yeah, I was gonna say put that up on your channel, but yeah, if it's not recorded, there's an issue there.
Yeah, it is. This would actually be a good segue into, maybe we should talk about abortion. That might be an interesting topic to discuss.
Yeah, it definitely. Abortion is one of those topics that I'm so wishy-washy on. I keep going back and forth onto different positions. I think I have like two sort of separate. There's sort of like my legal stance and my like moral stance. Like so, I do hold like sort of like the I guess like the Peter Singer like euthanizing like babies like after birth if it's assumed that their life's going to be like a life of suffering, or yeah. So I kind of it's really just like a pro utility sort of stance, but legally, because I think allowing that sort of legally gets really dicey. You can have a lot of people making like sort of bad calculations or whatever. So I think legally we should cap it at sentience. Um,
Oh, so
whatever
your
that is.
view
Yeah.
is that abortion after the point of sentience, abortion should be prohibited.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a view on like when sentience begins, or?
Um, I know like Avi will say something. I think he says like 8 weeks or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I also hear other people say like 20 weeks or they say 12 weeks. So I'm not sure. Like I intuitively I kind of feel like it's 20 weeks, but I'm actually not positive on that.
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the things that is I used to be someone who I thought my previous view that I held was that, abortion is like pretty much all abortion is fine because I think like 99% of abortions occur before 24 weeks.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, this is basically a non-issue for the most part. There might be a few like edge cases maybe that occur after 24 weeks, but like virtually all abortions occur uh, before the point of fetal sentience. And I don't value non-sentient beings or beings that have never attained sentience. So yeah, it's just a non-issue for me. Basically, that was my previous position.
Hmm.
The thing is, like after that, like you just said, I started hearing more. I started watching some of Avi's stuff, and I found that it's actually not. There's actually reason to believe that fetuses may become conscious much earlier than that.
Yeah, I saw. I guess there was like a paper that showed that like they'll respond to painkillers, um, before 20 weeks or like 12 weeks or so. They'll respond to like, yeah, being fed painkillers.
So
Um,
one of the things that I've heard is that like as I understand it, like the papers that claim that it only begins at 24 weeks or 18 weeks or like 28 weeks. There's like multiple numbers, but like one of these later dates, one of these later times in the pregnancy, like these papers basically rely on the fact that like fetuses don't have like a fully developed cortex, like they haven't developed a cortex yet. And like the basic argument is that like without a cortex, um, you can't be sentient. Like a cortex is a necessary condition for sentience. Um, Now the problem with that is that there are beings without cortexes who we would consider sentient. Like for example, fish, right? There actually are papers about fish sentience, making basically the same argument. Well, fish aren't like complex enough. They don't have cortexes, so they must not feel pain. There are papers arguing that. But the thing is, if you're going to take the view that like this applies especially to like the pro-choice vegans out there, if you're going to take the view that fish are sentient, but you're going to also take the view that like a fetus isn't sentient. Like I'm going to have to, and it's based on the reasoning that there's not a cortex. Like I'm going to have to hear some kind of symmetry breaker between those two, because otherwise it just seems like an epistemic double standard to think that fish are sentient, but also think that a fetus can't be sentient until it like develops a cortex.
yeah, that's like I hadn't thought about. That's actually a really good point. Yeah, comparing the fish to the fetus. I never thought of that, and I'm gonna steal that and use that. Um, because yeah, it's a good point.
One other thing I think about abortion is that, well, actually, let me ask you a question on this. Since you're a utilitarian, um, when you say that abortion, like, eh, you ban it after the point of sentience, like, is your view, does your legal view, does that drift from, like, your moral view? Or would you say you basically have the same views on the legality of it and the morality of it?
I think there's a lot of context where abortion can be justified morally, like even after birth. Um,
After
more,
birth or after
yeah,
sentient?
m- um, yeah. So I guess yeah, both, right? Yeah, morally, yeah. I think you can definitely. I think there's I think there's times where utility is increased by having like an abortion of like 6 months after birth or so.
See, my thing is that I think that if you're a utilitarian, um, and you're like a pure hedonistic utilitarian,
Yeah,
that the only things you care about are like just suffering and happiness.
yeah,
I don't think it actually should really matter. I don't think the view on abortion, like at what point the fetal sentience arises, I don't think that actually, like the utilitarian view on abortion is going to turn on that. Like, I don't really think that matters that much. Um, I don't see why it would, right? Because even if you're talking about a fetus that is non-sentient, that hasn't developed sentience yet, by killing it, I mean, you may not be killing a sentient being, but like you're still preventing. If we're assuming that humans live net happy lives, as most utilitarians I've seen do make that assumption,
yeah,
like then you are like you're just extinguishing like a whole bunch of future pleasure that would have been experienced.
yeah. Actually, I actually agree. So when I say that like a lot of abortions can be justified even after birth, I'm not talking about just like you know getting like willy nilly abortions. Like I'm talking about like getting abortions where where you assume that the life is not going to be net positive. Yeah, if the is gonna if we assume the life's going to be net positive, then like yeah, I think you ought to have the child.
And you would bite the bullet on it. Would you bite the bullet on that like even very early during the pregnancy?
Yeah. I think if you find out you're pregnant and you kind of don't really want the child, but it's assumed the child's going to have a happy life, then I think you should have the baby. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the thing that trips people up about this, or that the reason that people don't really like going down this route, is that it kind of implies uncomfortable conclusions about contraception. Um, like, because by using birth control, like you're also preventing a bunch of assuming that if like the person who you're having sex with would have gotten pregnant, um, and the baby would have had a net positive life. By using birth control, you're also preventing like a great amount of happiness from from materializing in the world.
Yeah.
So the concern that people have is, well, okay, if we're going to like say like, oh, like abortion is wrong because like this is the argument, or if abortion is wrong because like it prevents like a happy existence, it prevents a happy life, then like why isn't conception also wrong? And even like why isn't it even wrong to like do things that like if you're going to like if you're like just walking around, like if you're someone watching this video, like why isn't it wrong for you to like be having sex right now instead, uh to bring a new happy life into existence?
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, it is one of those like sort of um. What? Yeah. Why am I buying Swedish fish when I could be buying or donating to charity? Um. There are certain actions that have more, bring about more utility than other actions do. Um. Yeah, and so the aspect of like birth control, that's a really interesting one because so one part of me thinks that like encouraging birth control would be a good thing because actually encouraging. It seems like the kids are going to have higher net positive lives if the parents want them. Where it's like even if the parents don't want them, they'll probably still have net positive lives. But I don't know if like the amount of kids versus the amount of higher pleasure of wanting the kids. I don't know if that like balances out or if that like if one beats the other. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you could make the case for certain cases where like a parent has they use birth control or they have an abortion because like they will have one later. But like, what about it's still wrong because they
So you're cutting out quite a bit.
later.
I missed that you were cutting out quite a bit.
Well, I was saying that like even with cases like that, you could just have both kids. Like you could just have a kid now and then another kid later. Um, and that might be better for utility.
Yeah.
And then you get into like cases where like some people choose not to have kids at all. Is there something like would it be better if they chose to have kids?
Yeah, I mean, I think more happy people the better, right? So I think you ought to have kids. I think if you have the means to have kids and you're not having kids, I think it's probably a bad thing.
Yeah, see, so my thing about utilitarianism and abortion is that I think if your normative ethic is just utilitarianism or like hedonic utilitarian, and you only care about um, happiness and suffering, you don't have any other like conception of value. There's nothing else that you value besides just those two things. Um, if that's the case, like I think a lot of utilitarians are actually too eager to take a strong stance on abortion. Like a lot of most utilitarians, at least that I've seen, seem to be like pro-choice, and it's like I think that if you're a utilitarian, the factors that are involved are just really too complex to even have like a strong stance one way or the other. Um, because I could very easily see abortion being something that either net increases utility or net decreases utility. Like both of those, I think utilitarians are like too eager sometimes to make assumptions about whether having kids is better for utility. Because there are some utilitarians that seem to just take it, certain utilitarians just take it as a given that bringing more humans into the world um, that increases utility. When I don't really think there's much reason to think that's the case, or like there's like conflicting evidence. There's too much like interacting factors that complicate the calculation to really take a strong view on whether bringing more humans into existence, like an individual person having a kid or having an abortion, or like whether that would increase or decrease utility overall. Because
Yeah. Yeah.
like it's plausible to me that if the average person decides to have a child, it's not clear to me that that would be good for utility. Like it's plausible that could be like very bad for utility. It's plausible it could substantially reduce utility.
Yeah, there seems. I mean, there's factors like most people aren't vegan. Overpopulation. Harming the overall utility or.
Yeah, like I think the vegan one, that's the main one. And that's something I think that utilitarians don't really take into consideration as much as they should. Like when they make these sorts of calculations, like that actually should be like one of the dominant concerns. Like when you're doing it, when you're trying to like determine whether it's net positive or net negative to bring more humans into existence. Like their effect on farm animals should actually be like one of the dominant concerns. That should be one of the main things you're looking at. Like whether that individual specific human has like a positive or has a happy or unhappy life themselves. Like that's almost a rounding error compared to their effect on animals. Like
Yeah.
their effect on animals is going to be much, much way more important than that humans overall happiness that they personally experience, right? Because even if someone has a very happy life, they're probably, if they're a meat eater, they're probably causing the amount of suffering that they're causing via causing more animals to be bred in factory farms. I would think that almost certainly generates more suffering than that human experiences, than the happiness that human experiences throughout their entire life.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Like the average human eats around 7,000 animals throughout their lifetime, I believe. Where I think that's the average American, um, which is a substantial number. It's a very high number, and like virtually all of these are going to, like a high proportion of these are going to come from factory farms. So
Yeah, that would make me assume that like if you're vegan, then you probably ought to have kids like crazy to sort of because I think we can at least intuitively I feel like I would assume that if you're vegan and you have kids, your kids would probably stay vegan. Um, at least like probably like a large margin. So it seems like yeah, if you're vegan, you probably ought to have kids to sort
so
of counteract or yeah to balance
the
out the
other consideration though that involves animals is that the reason that, like, I'm certain that humans have a net negative impact when it comes to farm animals, and that overwhelms any the humans' own like experiences, their own hedonic states.
yeah
The thing that makes me cautious or like reluctant to take a strong view either one way or the other about whether humans have an overall positive or negative impact on utility is that humans are also going to have an impact on wild animals, and it's unclear to me whether that's going to outweigh the impact on farm animals or not, right? Because human like civilization is going to prevent many wild animals from being born just via way of like habitat destruction, and replacing wild land with human spaces. Um, so humans are going to prevent many wild animals from being born. Um, and if wild animals have lives containing net suffering, which is something that many people find plausible, then it may be the case that even with the all the harm caused by meat consumption, maybe the impact on wild animals actually outweighs that. So human lives still do end up being net positive at the end of it. But I don't know, it could easily be the other way too, that even if we have a positive impact on wild animal suffering, that our negative impact on farm animal suffering still like overwhelms that, and outweighs that. So I don't know. It's just, to me, it's too complicated. There's too many factors to really take a strong view on it one way or the other. And I don't know why so many utilitarians act as if it's like an easy question, as if it's an easy thing, like the answer is obvious, because it's really not.
yeah. I mean it's one of my favorite topics for that reason that it seems to be very complicated. It's not as easy as just being pro life or being pro choice. Like there's a lot of gray area in there.
That's the other reason that hesitant to. I'm not really sure what my position is on human, like antinatalism, like antinatalism for humans, because I'm kind of uncertain. It's unclear whether humans have a overall positive or negative effect on the things that I care about, which would be like alleviating extreme suffering. Like if humans, that's the problem I have with a lot of the antinatalist movement, actually, and why I choose not to identify as an antinatalist, even though under some definitions I might be considered one, is because most of the antinatalists I see, like, they overwhelmingly think that human extinction would be a good thing. And if what
Yeah.
you're concerned about is suffering, it's not actually clear that human extinction, uh, reduces suffering, because it almost seems like a very human-centric way of looking at the world, like the way that traditional antinatalists view it. Because humans make up a fringe minority of the beings in the world that experience suffering, right? If humans go extinct, uh, then wild animal populations are going to increase, because there's not going to be any more habitat destruction. Like, there's going to be no more humans to displace wild land. Wild animal population is just going to explode, as a result of humans going extinct. And I think wild animals are going to live much worse lives than humans. Like, as my own life, like, I don't have like a serious, there's not a large chance that I get like tortured via being eaten alive. Like, that's not something I have to seriously worry about. Like, just some being like ripping out my flesh as I'm still conscious. But if you're a wild animal, that is like,
A
there
serious
is a good
worry.
chance.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a good chance that happens to you. And there's a good chance you starve. I mean, I don't have to worry about starving. If I get a disease, if I get sick with something, I can just go to the hospital. With wild animals, there's no medicine. If they get sick, they get some disease, they're just fucked. And what makes it even worse is if they get a disease, they have to worry about the disease. And then there's also a fucking predator that's going to take advantage. Uh, you know, it's going to lower their defense mechanisms. It's going to be harder for them to escape. There's just many reasons why, like, a wild animal's life is going to be much worse than a human's life. So if you're getting rid of the human population, and like you're just replacing the human population with an even larger amount of animals, um, it might be the case that it might be the case that you're actually increasing the overall amount of suffering in the world by having humans go extinct.
Yeah. I always like to make the with like the whole thing about wild animals. I always like to make the point that it's like with humans and our ability to like um we have like sort of a higher mind state than animals do, where we can think about things more like abstractly and like morally reason to like a higher degree, or all these things where it's like we can oftentimes come out of our suffering with like a Viktor Frankl story, where it's like we learn from this and then we can use it to make our lives better. Where it's like animals don't really have that as much, where they really just suffer to suffer. Um, and on top of this, it's like um, when there's like wildfires, there are no like owl firefighters putting out the fire. It's humans, that with
Mm-hmm.
that mind, putting out the wildfires, or it's the humans that are pushing the whales back into the ocean. It's like humans are essentially like the moral mind of the wild, or they at least could be, because we don't always do such a good job about it. But uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Though, an interesting question that you bring up, wildfires. I mean, and people might find this somewhat perverse to speculate on, or like this line of like thinking, but one question is like, do wildfires actually result in overall increase in wild animal suffering? Um, Obviously, being burnt alive is going to be very painful, um, for the animals there who experience it. Um, but like, if wildfires result in like a longer like population decline in that area, for wild animals, like, it may be the case that it's actually overall reducing suffering. I think Brian Tomasic actually has written about that before. He has an article on his website about that. So I don't. It's like I don't know. With like wild animals, it's like very unclear. Like a lot of the things that we assume are bad for wild, that most people would assume are like net negative for wild animals, may actually not be. Most people have the intuitive view that like habitat loss, human, encroachment on wild land and destroying their habitats is a bad thing from the perspective of the wild animals. But I mean, if they are living net negative lives and we're preventing tons of beings from coming into existence and like experiencing like torture, through predation, or like preventing them from starving, it might be it's I think it's almost certainly the case that like habitat destruction, um, is good
Yeah, this is one
overall.
of this is yeah what me and like hunting Appalachia got in argument with, but uh yeah, I think this is where it gets sort of complicated, because I think obviously like the wild is so bad that if we could have a sustainable world that's just like one giant parking lot or whatever, yeah, that would be better. The issue is getting there, where it's like, are we getting there through wildfires, right, or like habitat destruction, and it's like, is the suffering of the animals by doing that, is that going to be worse than the prevention? And maybe not. Like I think there's a good argument to be made that like, yeah, destroying habitats, that would be actually be a good thing.
Yeah, I
But
think the main problem with habitat, destruction is like the kind of secondary effects it has. Like if that speeds up environmental damage, or climate change, right?
yeah,
And that fucks over humans. That may actually, like, if we do too much of it, um, now that might overall like fuck humans up, and that may harm our ability to help wild animals in the long term, right?
yeah, and I think
And so it
that's
could
the
like
big issue.
accelerate
Yeah,
wild animal suffering in the long term.
it's like we have
So
this end goal. We have this end goal, and it's like getting to that end goal has all these different like extrinsic sort of effects that happen, and it's really
you
hard
know,
to, yeah.
and though I one consideration that I've heard before for why, maybe human extinction still might be net positive, um, on utility, even when you consider the effect on wild animals, is that some people have argued that, well, okay, if humans go extinct, then it's true that wild animal populations on will increase, and there'll be more overall as a result of human extinction. But it also might be the case, it also would be the case that, if humans go extinct now, that also means that we're not going to be colonizing other planets, right? And if we don't colonize other planets, that means we're not going to spread wildlife to other planets. That's a concern that some people have, that if we like
Oh, okay.
colonize Mars, or some other planet, that we might end up like spreading wildlife to like these other planets. And so that might drastically increase the amount of wild animal suffering in the world.
Yeah,
Like if we go, yeah,
something to think about that is like, um, would like another like through evolution or whatever, would another creature emerge that may not have the same intuitions about like not, so it's like if we kill all humans, and then we have this other, eventually, uh as the wild takes its course, and all this jazz, we have another sort of like human creature that then does not have the same intuitions about, um yeah, restricting a, uh what's the word, going to other planets, and yeah, yeah.
Yeah, or like some people have also said that maybe it's the case that like there are other planets that already have sentient life on them, and maybe we could go there and like if we colonize other planets, maybe if they already have sentient life, we might be able to alleviate the suffering of that sentient life. I mean, there's just like a whole bunch of factors to consider, which is why I'm kind of I don't know, I'm kind of like uncertain on human procreation. You know, another consideration is that like maybe if humans continue, well, I say if, like humans almost certainly are going to continue procreating. I don't think we're at any risk of antinatalism succeeding for humans. I think most humans just have an intrinsic kind of repulsion to that sort of view. But anyway, if humans like do continue, the species does continue. Something I know David Pierce has talked about this is that we might be able to actually develop biotech that eliminates suffering entirely. I think he calls it like the hedonistic imperative. And like through advanced technology in the future, it might be the case that like we eliminate suffering for humans with this advanced biotech, and maybe we even find out a way to like prevent wild animal suffering without any major like ecological concerns. We somehow find a way to resolve that problem.
Oh yeah, that that would be like the easiest option, I think. Like that seems if we can figure out a way to just like yeah, put some I don't know, some micro robots in the water that end animal suffering. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. This kind of is all like academic anyway, because I don't think, like I said, I don't think humans are ever going to accept antinatalism. Um, I just don't think humans are ever going to voluntarily go extinct. Even if you convinced the majority of the population, like you'd really have to, like, if even if there's just a small percentage of people who disagree with the idea, like you'd really have to convince basically everyone, right? Because even if it's like a 5% of the population that like disagrees with antinatalism, like you're kind of fucked. Like, you know, I mean,
Yeah, there's that
because they're
5%
gonna fuck,
destroys,
and
yeah.
then they're gonna have more
Yeah.
kids. Uh, so like you'd have to, in practice, I think you'd have to, in order to make sure it succeeds. Like I know a lot of antinatalists kind of espouse, well, like we're like a non-violent like movement. We don't want to like impose any authoritarian measures on people. We want it to just be completely voluntary. But like in practice, if you were going to achieve such a thing as human extinction, I just think practically speaking, it would have to be done through force. Um, it could not
Yeah.
be. It's realistically, it could not be done peacefully. It could not be done voluntarily, and that's going to be a problem for like the anti-natalists. Um, it's like, what do you value more, like making humans go extinct, or like your like non-violence or like peaceful like methods?
Yeah, I think about how like even with positions that it seems that everyone's in agreement on, like it's actually not true that everyone's in agreement on them. It's like we still have, we still have Nazis that exist. We still have, murderers and pedophiles, and these seem to be like topics that like we seem to be in agreement on, but we can't even be fully in agreement on those things. So it's like to take a controversial topic like human extinction and to assume that you would get everyone on board seems yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, there's no ideology that you're ever going to get everyone on board with. It's just not going to happen. You're always going to have some people who dissent. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
so I don't know. That's the problem with that's the problem that antinatalists face. For people who do kind of hold both those views in conjunction. The other thing, though, is like even if I were an antinatalist in like the human sense, even if I did favor human extinction, which I don't, but even if I did, like that's not something I would actually advocate for. It's not something I would spend time advocating for, because again, I just think it would be fruitless. I just think it's largely a waste of time. Like it's hard enough already to even convince people just to go vegan, right? Um,
Yeah.
not to bring in not it's already hard enough to convince people not to bring into existence beings who experience lives of torture, right? It's going to be even harder to convince people not to bring into existence humans who live mostly happy lives. um like it's just a massive task. And like the other question is that even if you're human, even if you favor human extinction overall, it's not clear that like on an individual case, if you're an anti-natalist, that like that not having kids is actually going to be good, or like convincing someone not to have kids is going to be good. Because again, if someone's sympathetic to antinatalism already, if you're talking to a person who's like open to that sort of view, like they probably are, they're also going to be disproportionately likely to accept veganism, right? And like they may well be a vegan already. And so like if you're convincing vegans to be antinatalist and you're convincing them, oh, like not to have kids, um, that might be a bad thing, because you might be hurting the numbers of the vegan movement by doing that, by preventing them from passing on those like vegan views onto their children.
Yeah, the non-vegans are having kids, and then the vegans stop having kids. You kind of just reducing the vegans.
Yeah, so that's another concern.
Yeah, I share that concern as well. I originally heard it from Avi in his Discord. Yeah, pretty much. I'm pretty much just ditto everything you've said about antinatalism, or not entirely everything, but like at least this most recent sort of rant. Uh, yeah, I think
Well,
there's a lot
yeah,
of
because we come at it from different normative frameworks,
yeah.
right? Like very different ones. So I'm going to be a lot more sympathetic to it than you are, even if I don't end up endorsing it in practice.
Yeah, but yeah, I think we agree on a lot of like the practical issues about like vegans not having as many kids, the issues with wild animal suffering, the issues with the sort of the force aspects of it, getting everyone on board, all these things. Yeah, I think we're in agreement there.
Going back to abortion, since we were talking about that before, have you this is like my kind of hot take. I think that both pro-choicers and pro-lifers, generally speaking, are really fucking stupid.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, I mean, I at least the most vocal ones that you see online, like, it seems very clear to me that most of them have never seriously thought about the issue at all, and they're really just repeating talking points with each other. They're just repeating talking points that they've heard from someone else, from like someone on TV or something. Like they've
Yeah,
never actually thought about it seriously.
I think it's a prime example of like this aspect, like people talking over each other, and like it's like someone will say something. They'll say, "Hey, like I value human life. A fetus is a human life. We shouldn't like uh kill it." And then like the pro-choicer, it's like they didn't even hear anything they said, and they just say, "My body, my choice." It's like, well, we weren't even talking about your body. We're talking about the body inside of it, and yeah,
Well,
it
I
just
think one of
seems
the yeah.
and oftentimes when they'll say this "my body, my choice" argument, like they're not even referring to like this like Judith Thompson type like uh having this like symbiotic like relationship. They just think that these like conservatives are telling or like forcing them to like not make their own personal choice, and it just it seems weird to me where it's like you're kind of just not even like listening to what the pro life argument is. Yeah.
By the way, Judas Jarvis Thompson is completely insane. That's another hot take I have. I guess a lot of pro-choicers, like at least the more like philosophically rigorous pro or literate pro-choicers, they'll cite that paper. And I've read that paper before. I think it's a very overrated paper. I do not think it makes. I think some of the positions outlined in that paper that she takes are just like completely insane. Like no reasonable person would take the sorts of positions that she does. Um, like one of the things she says in that paper is that if you have if you have someone that's going to die and you could save their life by just simply touching their forehead or something like that, like you have no obligation. You have no moral obligation to touch their forehead, even if you could save their life. Just
Yeah, it's
all you
silly.
have to do is touch their forehead. The most minimal of effort to save someone's life. Yeah, you're not doing anything morally wrong by refraining from doing that. And I'll tell you what makes it even more insane is that in the paper she specifically says even if you're in the very same room with that person already, so you don't even have to like drive over to them or something like that. You don't even have to really take time out of your day, drive over to where they are. Like you're literally sitting across from them in the same exact room. You're right next to them. It takes literally almost zero effort to save their life. But according to Judas Jarvis Thompson, oh, you have no moral obligation to do that. Like you haven't done anything morally wrong by not touching their forehead and saving their life. Like it's completely insane.
Yeah, it's almost the opposite of Peter Singer. You come across a drowning child, and you should push them you should push them in further. It's like, yeah, that seems absurd.
Yeah, I think one problem with like pro-choicers and pro-lifers though is that I think the problem or part of the problem is that they're only used to like dealing with the stupid people on the other side. Like pro-choicers are used to like dealing with like stupid, like all the pro-lifers they talk to are like stupid. They're used to talking to all the stupid pro-lifers, and all the pro-lifers are used to talking to like the stupid pro-choicers. Like none of they haven't most of them it seems haven't really taken the time to like look for the best advocates for the opposing view, the strongest. They haven't taken the time to read and seek out like what are the strongest arguments for like a pro-choice position, or what are the strongest arguments for the pro-life position.
Yeah, I remember back in like high school going on because I was interested in the topic. I would go on YouTube and search for like abortion debate, and all I would find is just like Steven Crowder change my mind videos. So I just got filled with brain rot for years and years, just because the content wasn't there. These days it's gotten better, but yeah, back in the day I was just like being filled with brain rot.
If you're interested in seeing what I think is probably what's the strongest pro-life view, pro-life argument that I've seen. It's by a philosopher, actually by an atheist philosopher, um, named I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but it's Don Marquise. Don Marquise. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, but he makes an argument. It's basically the future like ours argument. Um, and it's basically a deprivation argument. It's like what he like goes into, like, well, what's the reason that we consider it wrong to like kill someone, right? Like what makes killing someone wrong? Like if I go and like there's a 5-year-old and I just go and shoot her in the head, like what makes it wrong that I did that? And he proposes that the primary reason, the primary wrongness of that, it's because I'm depriving that 5-year-old or whoever I've killed of a happy like existence, like a future like ours, he calls it. And so he argues that the same applies to the fetus, that by killing the fetus, in the same way that if you were to kill like a 5-year-old or like a 20-year-old adult, you're depriving them of a future like ours. And so abortion is wrong for that reason.
I think I found it. A link to the PDF. But yeah, I think that's interesting. So it's the 1989 Why Abortion is Immoral, Don Marquis.
Yeah, that's it. That I think is that's the strongest pro-life case that I've seen. And the reason I think that's the most convincing is that he's not really like the typical like stereotypical pro-lifer. Like he's an atheist first of all.
Yeah.
You know, he's not religious, so it's not coming from like a religious point of view. And he's also not big into like the sanctity of human life view, right? Because
Yeah.
I think he actually takes the view that like if you're talking about an abortion, that's like, oh, like the fetus is going to have like a miserable like existence, or like the baby when it's born is going to have a miserable existence, it's going to die um, soon after birth, and like you could detect that before, like during the pregnancy. He actually thinks that abortion is fine in those circumstances, or like a lot of pro-lifers will still think that's wrong. So I think a lot of the persuasiveness of it comes from like he's not the stereotypical pro-lifer, doesn't take like the stereotypical the traditional pro-life position. He kind of comes at it from another perspective. Now I will say I still don't think the argument works. I don't find it persuasive. I don't think he successfully shows that abortion is immoral, but I do think it is the strongest argument for abortion being immoral.
Yeah, I'm interested to read it. It seems like a fairly short paper. Seems like a pretty quick read. So
I do also I do think that that page that I mentioned earlier, they're on YouTube, and they also have a blog called Equal Rights Institute. I also think some of their stuff is, if you're looking for a more like a smart pro-life perspective, I would also recommend their stuff. They're by far like some of like the better, like they're by far like the best pro-life like content creators that I've seen. The thing I like about them is that they kind of they like emphasize fairness, like actually addressing like being fair to like the pro-life side. No, being fair to like the pro-choice side, not like straw manning pro-choice arguments. Like they have pages explaining, okay, like here's like why certain pro-life talking points are dumb. Like you're straw manning the pro-choice position. Here's why this like common thing that pro-lifers say doesn't work as a response to pro-choice views. So like I like that they're like intellectually honest, and also they're a lot more philosophically rigorous than the typical like pro-life people that you see online. Like for example, like they will engage with hypotheticals, which is a pleasant surprise. Most pro-life people and pro-choice people, to be fair, they love dodging hypotheticals. If you give them a hypothetical to demonstrate the unintuitive entailments of the view that they're espousing, they'll just dodge it. They will refuse to engage with it. They'll cope by saying, "Oh, it's unrealistic." The typical thing that like either dumb or intellectually dishonest people do when they know that their view doesn't hold up to scrutiny. But I like these people because like when I had that Zoom call with the person from there, like I didn't have any of that. Um, like he would like directly respond to the hypotheticals I was giving. And they've actually have some pretty good hypotheticals of their own for people who take like an extreme bodily autonomy view. Like for people who take an extreme pro-choice view, like, oh, basically you can do anything you want with the fetus because it's inside your body. It's your bodily autonomy. There's kind of a more moderate version, and then there's that more extreme version. They have some really good hypotheticals for like people who take the more extreme view.
Yeah. Here I'm linking the equal rights as well. Yeah. What do we remember some of their like interesting hypotheticals?
Yeah, so I think one of their hypotheticals, if I'm remembering it correctly, was like I think it's like uh, one of them is like a woman who she's pregnant, but like she finds out her boyfriend is cheating on her, and she knows that the boyfriend is pro-life, so she decides to, in order to like, because she wants to get back at him for like cheating on her, she decides, okay, like my boyfriend that I found out was cheating on me is pro-life. Like, I'm going to get an abortion now just to like upset him. And not only is she going to get an abortion, she specifically gets a doctor to perform the abortion so that it's as painful as possible for the fetus. Just like absolute like make it so that the fetus experiences like just basically torture because I want to get back at my pro-life boyfriend who cheated on me. So that's one. And then I think another one is like a woman who decides to get pregnant and have an abortion, or she decides to get pregnant and have an abortion. And the reason she does that is solely because she wants to use like the fetal body parts in an art project for school. She wants to create an art project and use like the fetal like remains for the art project. So she gets pregnant and deliberately has an abortion just for that purpose. Is that okay? Is that like morally permissible?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. You know what? I think probably in hindsight, I wrongfully bit the bullet on something similar to that, where, um, uh, someone gave me this hypothetical. It was Has Vegan. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but so Has Vegan. I had a conversation with him, and
Yeah, I don't know who that is. Not
he
familiar with him.
but he gave this hypothetical where it's like, one of this woman just had this like art project of like of 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 just bottle like pick having like pickled fetuses in jars, and she just really liked having pickled fetuses, so she just kept having babies or having abortions and then bottling up the fetus, and she just, it gave her pleasure. And I sort of bit the bullet on that, but then it's like, in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have bit the bullet, because now you're having all these like, uh you're depriving like the future pleasure of all these fetuses that could have been experiencing happy lives. Yeah. So
Yeah, I
it's like,
think. Yeah,
I guess I could, like, if her pleasure was high enough, right? If she just got like the largest amount of pleasure, like to like just some high like galactic amount, then like eventually, yeah, I'd have to bite the bullet on that, but it seems
yeah,
unlikely.
and I think the tamest hypothetical that they give is they give one about like a mother who decides to take thalidomide uh, while she's pregnant, um, which is seriously going to fuck up like the fetus.
Yeah.
So that's the tamest one they have, and their strategy is kind of like, okay, you present this one first, And then like usually most of the time like the pro-choicer like will back off and like say, oh no, I don't think that's okay. They'll kind of back off the view they originally espoused. But if you have like a particularly stubborn one who like wants to bite the bullet on that, then they kind of advance. They gradually like give like more and more extreme hypotheticals, right? And just like until they get to the most extreme one, and like trying to see like how much like this pro-choicer can take, like how far they're willing to go in biting the bullet on this stuff. And then like once they bite like the most extreme like version of the bullet, if they do, then it's kind of like, well, now it's kind of like, I mean, there's not really much more to be said. Um, if they're willing to bite such extreme bullets, it's kind of like a
Yeah.
similar approach. Like I might take like when discussing veganism with people, like if someone bites the bullet on like a sufficiently insane reductio, there's like some point at which I feel like, you know what, there's really no use in talking to this person anymore. Um, like if they're okay with this, I'm not going to convince them that it's. I'm not going to convince them of veganism. Like there's one person I talked to on Twitter, and he was basically saying, well, it's okay to treat animals the way we do because they have such low cognitive capabilities, and so because of those low cognitive capabilities, they don't have any intrinsic moral value at all. Um, and then so I asked this person, okay, like there are humans who have the same cognitive capabilities as animals. Do you think it's okay to kill those humans? And then they said, well, it's not okay to kill those humans because it would have a negative effect on the rest of society. It's kind of like if you like kill, if like, because those humans, they don't have intrinsic moral value, but there are like humans who do have intrinsic moral value that will experience emotional like trauma or like as a result of
Sure.
that. Like for example, if someone has like a pet rock or something, like if there's some 5-year old that has a pet rock, like the rock doesn't have any intrinsic moral value, but it would still be wrong for me to like destroy the rock because like the 5-year old is going to be emotionally upset by that. And so that was kind of what he was doing here, but except for like a rock, he's saying that about like intellectually disabled humans. Uh, and so I said, okay, like I gave him like some hypothetical, like if someone were to like, let's say it had no effect on the rest of society. If someone were to like rape and like kill an intellectually disabled child, are you okay with that? And he said, yeah, I'm okay with that. And then I asked him, okay, like let's say there's 6 million Jewish intellectually disabled children. If someone were to just shove them all into gas chambers, are you okay with doing that? And he's like, yeah, I'm okay with doing that. And then I asked him, the final one I gave him was, okay, let's say like I forget the number I gave. It's like if we just took like some massive, huge amount of like intellectually disabled children, like I think the number I gave was like 86 decillion or something, and we all just put them like in like torture chambers, and they're just tortured their entire lives, but or actually longer than that. They're just like in tortured in pepper like basically forever, or for some like very long like amount of time. Like, are you okay with doing that? And then they were like, yeah, I don't see any moral issue with doing that. And I'm like, okay, like at this point, it's like if you're gonna be okay with that, like I'm not gonna convince you that it's wrong to buy animal products. I'm not gonna convince you that factory farming, uh, and especially not animal farming in general, is wrong. If you're okay with doing that to humans,
Yeah, I run into similar things when it with a lot of religious people, where the whole like made in God's image thing, where it's like they'll bite the bullet on just like massive amounts of torture simply because it's yeah, they're not made in God's image. Yeah.
also this Jeremy Gord, the person we talked to
Uh huh.
yesterday, He says in the chat, he asks me if I think that the utilitarian organ harvesting hypothetical, like where you kill one person, you kill, like a doctor kills one patient to harvest their organs and save 5 other people who need organ transplants. He asked me if I think that's an insane bullet bite. So the answer to that is again, like, due to my like anti-realist view, I'm just going to say that like the insanity of a bullet bite is just going to be dependent from like the perspective of the person evaluating it. So from my stance, from my perspective, my moral views, no, that's not an insane bullet bite. I do bite the bullet on that. Like I would say that you should harvest the organs in that situation because I am a consequentialist. Uh, but I do think that would be insane to the average person would find that insane, and I wouldn't really blame someone if someone had very strong like deontic views, and like they present me or some other consequentialist with these like hypotheticals, and I just bite the bullet on all of them. I wouldn't blame them for saying like, okay, like we just have such our values are just so fundamentally different that I think it's just time to end the conversation now. We're not really going to. I'm not going to persuade you. You're not going to persuade me. Um, you know, we just have an irreconcilable like value difference. Like I wouldn't blame them for doing that. I think that would be reasonable on their part.
Yeah, I'm also not an anti-realist, so I hold the same view.
You mean
Or
you're
all
not
right,
a realist? I
I'm not a
thought.
realist. So yeah, exactly. I think the term is if I if I'm actually not positive what the correct term would be, but I think something of like a subjectivist or
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, me too. At least in terms of again how I personally use moral language. I don't want to make a semantic thesis because I consider that would be an empirical question. But I'm pretty open about the fact that a lot of the views that I hold, most people would find them insane. Like I'm not going to go down the route that like some utilitarians or consequentialists will go down, which is like, oh, or like people basically of all like moral like persuasions, not just limited to utilitarians, but some people will say, well, most people might hold that view at first glance. They might have this intuition at first glance, but upon reflection, they actually hold my view. Like it's like, I mean, I think that's the case with some things, but a lot of things, I think no. Like even upon reflection, they would still think my view, and a lot of the other views that consequentialists hold are insane. So
I think a lot of it really does bottom out in the trolley problem, where it's like so like not everybody pulls the lever, or even just like um, we don't even have to use the trolley problem. Just use really any sort of like basic uh use some similar thought experiment where like you sort of separate, you make it more like sort of logical rather than like uh intuitively icky, I guess. um I just think it's the case that like this the fact that I think most people pull the lever, I think you can kind of just reverse other hypotheticals back to that. Like I see no difference between pulling the lever versus killing the or harvesting the organs. So yeah, but at the same time, right? Not everybody pulls the lever, so there, you can have some group of people that aren't going to be okay with, upon reflection, even upon reflection, they're not going to be okay with harvesting the organs either.
yeah, and of course, like, well, we might not see a morally relevant difference between those cases. A lot of people are going to see a morally relevant difference between the cases. So
Yeah, well, I think that's where the upon reflection part comes in. I think that starts to the line starts to become more gray. But yeah, I think you're right. There probably still would be a handful of people that would still find something different within those. Okay, I mean, I think so. We've been talking for close to 2 hours here. So I see the last topic is the most important one, which is the Looney Tunes show, uh, season 1 versus season 2, Bugs Bunny.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
You know,
So
it's yeah.
I kind of do we know Pogfish's take on this?
No, but whatever it is, I'm certain that it'll be stupid. It'll be the wrong
Amazing.
one. You can basically, if you were to bet me like $1 million, and you're like, "What's Pogfish's take on this?" Like, I would easily bet like it's just gonna be like whatever the fucking terrible take is. That's the one Pogfish is taking. I think that would reliably. That's a reliable way of winning a bet. Tried and true
Amazing.
method. No, it's actually amazing how terrible his takes on everything are.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not. I mean, I see him on Twitter, and I'm not a fan of most of his takes. Yeah.
yeah, well, first of all, he's like always posting stupid anti-vegan stuff. Um, but he also just has a bunch of bad takes on other things, on politics that are unrelated to veganism. Like, like he had a really bad take on something that happened recently was like Obama posted his like whatever like Spotify summer playlist or whatever,
Yeah.
and like one of the bands that he listed, I forget the band's name, but one of the members of that band like quote tweeted Obama and responded to him on Twitter saying like you're a war criminal. And
Nice.
Pogfish and like all the other liberals on Twitter just have completely ridiculous takes on this. Uh, like they're all freaking out, like oh, like how could you say that? Like I saw one that was like, oh, you know, words mean something. Like a war crime isn't just when a president does something you don't like. It's like okay, like saying that Obama's a war criminal doesn't hinge on like a war crime. That doesn't rely. It doesn't rely on some proprietary definition of war crime. Like you could reasonably say that just with the standard legal definition of war crime.
Yeah.
Um, like Pogfish on Twitter had like some posts saying like, oh, like war crimes. In order for something to be a war crime, it has to be like you have to like in order for killing civilians to be a war crime, you have to like do it intentionally. If it's an accident, it's not a war crime. Which is not true, by the way. Like killing civilians can be a war crime, even if it's not intentional. Like if it's done with gross negligence, that still constitutes a war crime under international law. Um, it doesn't have to be like you don't have to be deliberately targeting civilians. That's not a necessary condition for it to be a war crime. So that's the first point. And people who freak out about calling like Obama or like American presidents war criminals, like they act as if the idea that the Obama administration committed war crimes or that the drone strikes constitute war crimes, they act as if that's like some like fringe like crazy idea that exists solely on like Rose Twitter. Like, and it's like, no, that's like mainstream human rights organizations. That's actually mainstream human rights organizations such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have like come out and released reports saying like, actually no, like these drone strikes, there's a very plausible legal case to be made that the drone strikes committed under the Obama administration constitute war crimes. There, you also have UN officials who say that. People who work at the United Nations. It's not by any means some like fringe or absurd idea when you talk about people who like actually are experts who have the relevant expertise in these areas.
Yeah, and a lot of these people would probably turn around and call like George Bush a war criminal for doing similar things. Yeah,
I don't. It depends. Like the online liberals, like certain online liberals will even defend George Bush. They'll say, "Well, no, he wasn't a war criminal either." Like, oh, some of them just
that's
have
true.
like a specific like American apologism. The funniest thing that they do is like when they'll say, "Oh, like Obama was never convicted, so therefore, like you can't call him a war criminal." It's like so it's a pretty funny standard which they don't apply to other cases. Like, oh, just because someone's never been convicted of war crimes, that means they're not a war criminal. Okay, like, do you also apply that to Assad? Assad has never been convicted of war crimes, so like, would you say he's not a war criminal? Or like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, like Putin has not been convicted officially by the International Criminal Court for war crimes. So like, is it inappropriate now to call Putin a war criminal? Because he hasn't been convicted for that. Like, it's a really absurd standard that they don't apply to other cases.
Yeah, it's silly. Yeah, it's uh, sort of analogous to a lot of what happens in politics. Um, yeah. On as far as Looney Tunes, the Looney Tunes show. So do you think there's any chance that it gets rebooted?
I think it's a very small chance. Like Looney Tunes has already gone through several other reboots at this point since then. Like they had Wabbit, which they at some point renamed uh, New Looney Tunes, and then they also had another reboot after that called Looney Tunes Cartoons. I don't know if that one's still ongoing or not, but so I don't. I think the chances of it are pretty low. Though I did see someone on Twitter today. Ironically, I saw someone calling for the show to be renewed for a season 3. Then under that, I saw someone say, "I hope that if they do bring it back, they return to the season 1 uh, animation style." So, as you
Amazing.
can see by that
There's a
evidence by that
movement.
comment, I'm not the only one who has this realization that the purple Bugs Bunny looks much superior to the gray one.
So what about the Bugs Bunny that Jeremy's proposing?
Let me see. They should make Bugs Bunny one-eared. I don't know. I'd have to see that. I gotta get an official sketch of it or something. The demo design or something.
And then we can do a 3-hour stream and rate it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think this is a good time to call it quits on the stream. So
Okay.
it was good talking. Covered a lot of topics, and
Yep.
especially the most important topic of Bugs Bunny.
Of course.
Yeah. So it's good talk. See you.
Yeah.
See you later.
I hope my avatar didn't cut out
Yeah, I can still
again
see it. I can
midstream.
still
Yeah.
see it. So
Yeah. Last time when we streamed, like randomly at some point when I was rewatching it on YouTube, like at some point at the beginning, I had like the Bugs Bunny avatar. At some point, it just like reverted back to the like the default
yeah,
avatar.
like
I
just
think
like
it
the
happened.
circle. Yeah.
It happened after like you disconnected, and after you came back, I noticed on the YouTube stream my avatar was at the default avatar, which is really weird because when I was in the stream while we were doing it on StreamYard, it still showed me as having the Bugs Bunny avatar.
Wow.
So I
You
had
know what?
no idea that it changed until afterwards.
I think that would put me in the realm of being a war criminal. So,
Yeah,
oh
they
shoot.
got to add that to the Geneva Conventions.
True. All right. Yeah. Good talk.
Okay.
Um, Adios.
Okay, bye.